The United States is pulling nearly 12,000 troops from Germany in a larger-than-expected redeployment plan announced last Wednesday. US defense officials said it was the result of a months-long review of America's global military presence and said the redeployments would enhance Washington's ability to deter and respond to threats from major powers such as Russia and China. Under the Pentagon's plan, some 5,600 US troops will be moved from Germany to other NATO allies, including Belgium and Italy. Another 6,400 are set to return to the US, and this plan has unleashed strong criticism against President Trump, both at home and abroad, as observers fear the move would work to the advantage of the Kremlin. There are also worries of a domino effect of the US further downsizing in allied countries, including South Korea and Japan, if they don't pay more for defense costs as Trump has threatened. To discuss the issue, we have joining us today Kim Young-jun, Professor of National Security Affairs at Korea National Defense University and a member of the National Security Advisory Board to the South Korean President. It's lovely to see you today, Dr. Kim.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you. And we also connect with Joseph Bosco, former China Country Director in the US Office of the Secretary of Defense and contributor to The Hill. Lovely to see you again, Dr. Bosco.
Nice to see you, Jim.
Well, my first question goes to you, Dr. Kim. So what do you think really is the motivation behind the troop cut in Germany? And do you think it's a wise decision that will benefit the United States and its allies?
Yes, it's a great question, and is not a wise decision at all, as my understanding. This is the Trump campaign promise, as we understand American first policy, and he continuously argue that he wants to burden sharing and cost sharing with the allied nation. But the problem is that alliance is not just the business relations or money relations. It's more about the emotional or psychological ban. So South Korean people or German people are always thinking about why Trump did this, and then what is the reason behind of the Trump decision. Also, Russian and China also looking at this kind of decision. So I think it'll be a long signal to the Russia and China, and also it's a very psychological scar to the people of the allied nation, including South Korean people as well.
Well, as you mentioned, it does seem to be a rather emotional decision. I mean, everyone knows that Donald Trump and Angela Merkel don't entirely get on. Well, Dr. Bosco, do you think this decision will really strengthen the NATO alliance, as the US claims? I mean, European officials have stated the opposite. What are the biggest risks or the concerns in doing this?
Well, as Dr. Kim mentioned, this is not a new issue for Donald Trump. He not only campaigned on the issue of troop reductions and changing the compensation levels, he has been talking about that for years before he ever ran for president. So that issue is one that we've had to confront. Now, as to whether it will strengthen or weaken the alliance, I think much of it depends on where the troops will be deployed to when they leave Germany, for example. To the extent that they go to Belgium or Italy or even Poland, I think that's just a readjustment within the alliance. But if the troops come away from Europe and come back to the United States, then one could make the argument that that is a potential weakening of the alliance and something that Russia and China as well would look upon with favor. So I think it has to be done very carefully, and I think a great deal of thought has gone into it, and more thought should go into where those troops will go once they leave Germany or wherever else they leave from.
Right, the 6,400 troops that are set to return to the US, we'll have to see what happens to them, as you mentioned. Well, Dr. Kim, even as US military officials defended the redeployments as strategic, Trump told reporters at the White House that the partial US pullout from Germany does come down to the last dollar. Do you think it's reasonable for the US to ask for more money, especially at the rate that it's demanding from European countries and countries like South Korea?
Actually, Trump is not the first person who asked more money from the alliance nation. Just like as you remember, Ronald Reagan or other neoconservative people in the Iraq war, they think about the alliance is no longer sustainable because of the difference between Iraq decision or not. So we remember about the book of the Ronald Kagan in 2000, early 2000. So the topic let's start in the early 2000, and Trump used this for his national security policy. So I think it's some kind of reasonable for the U.S. Would like to ask more money from the European country, but at the same time, to the methodology by using the Trump administration is so radical. Alliance countries did not understand why so fast and why so hurry to ask more money for just 1 or 2 years. So the methodology is not acceptable by the allied nation, but the argument of the Trump administration for more money or cost sharing or a change of burden sharing is acceptable, I think.
Dr. Bosco, would you agree with that? Do you think it's somewhat reasonable for the US to ask its allies to pay up?
Yes, I do. And not only do I think that, but General Secretary von Stoltenberg, who was the head of the NATO alliance, has said recently that he thought Trump's pressures on the NATO members to increase their contribution to the collective defense has actually been effective, has actually increased the contributions of some of the member states. So in that sense, it's part of Trump's negotiating style. He's learned that in business, that to apply pressure to your negotiating partner is one way of getting results. It seems to have worked to a certain extent with some of the NATO allies, and to that extent, it's a good thing. But obviously, there's a limit. It cannot be, the demands cannot be extreme or overly rash and harsh, because then it has a counterproductive effect on the allies' psychology and their willingness to cooperate. And that is not something that we want to encourage.
And Dr. Bosco, the Trump administration has threatened to withdraw troops from South Korea and Japan, which both host tens of thousands of US personnel, amid stalled negotiations over the US's demands for more compensation. Does the downsizing in Germany indicate that such a move is also possible here on the Korean Peninsula?
I think with President Trump, it very definitely is a possibility. And I'm hoping that our allies, both in Europe and in Asia, will seriously consider whether the demands he is making are fair in terms of increasing the level of compensation. If they're fair, then I hope they will cooperate and increase that level so that we don't get to the point of having troops removed, which can only benefit China in the case of Korea and North Korea, or Russia in the case of Germany.
Dr. Kim, would you agree with that? I mean, in recent weeks, there were reports of the possibility of the US troops downsizing here on the peninsula. Do you think it's a possibility, and what are the risks of doing so?
I absolutely agree with Dr. Bosco, and even though the Secretary Mark Esper denied several times, but I think it's the high possibility of the reducing troops. Now we have in Korea 280,000 US troops, and Trump continually ask for more money, and the rich nation have to pay for more burden sharing, and it will be long signal to China and even possibly North Korea as well. So, but I think it's a little difference between the European case and the Pacific area is because of China, not because of Trump more love to the Korea and Japan. But China is more focusing on the by the Trump administration rather than Russia. So China issue maybe prevent radical reducing of the U.S. troops because of the European country doesn't have China in the region. So I think China is the one of the biggest factor if Trump did not reduce the troops of the Japan and Korea.
Oh, so you think that the US's deterrence against China might grow as compared to Russia? Well, Dr. Bosco, President Trump has been very eager to downsize the US military presence overseas everywhere, really, before the November election. But is this a sound strategy that will benefit US interests in the long run?
Well, as I mentioned, as far as the European redeployment, it will only benefit the United States if the troops are repositioned elsewhere in the NATO alliance. I don't think it would be useful for there to be a downgrading of the overall NATO capability. As far as Asia, South Korean and Japan deployments, I believe that China is watching very closely and would interpret any withdrawal of forces from either of those allies as a plus for themselves, as a reduction in the US deterrent against both North Korea and China. So I'm hopeful that we can work out whatever differences there are in compensation and that the force levels in both South Korea and Japan will remain where they are.
And Dr. Kim, in terms of the South Korea-US alliance, Seoul and Washington have been working to transfer wartime operational control to South Korea. What will change with this, and when do you think would be the right timing?
OPCON transfer is one of the biggest issues between the ROC-US alliance, and we have been closely working together and based on condition, not based on timeline. So this kind of issue, reducing troops, is a very confusing factor in regarding the OPCON transfer. And even we did not start the denuclearization talk between the North Korea and the U.S. So we have been seriously thinking about OPCON transfer and reducing troops of burden sharing issue together. This is not a separate issue, but we should consider of them together between the ROC and the U.S. problem. So OPCON transfer is the biggest, one of the important issue affected by the burden sharing issue.
And Dr. Kim, how do you think that the South Korea-US alliance should evolve, irrespective of politics?
Yeah, we have to agree with especially between ROC-US should have a more strategic vision for the long term. Traditionally, ROC-US alliance is military alliances since the Korean War. We have blood alliances, but we in the now is 21st century, and South Korea pursue the peace of the Korean Peninsula, or peace treaty, or denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. So ROC-US should have agree more like for the strategic vision for the 21st century, not just military alliances. So we have to have agreement on China issue or regional order and new Northeast Asian security order. So based on this strategic shared vision, we consider about the burden sharing issue or OPCON transfer as well.
And Dr. Bosco, how do you think the US military presence should be strategized in the East Asia region?
Well, clearly the two threats the two threats are China and North Korea. I think one of the potential issues is that the perceptions sometimes in the United States is that the Moon government does not see the North Korean threat or the China threat in exactly the same way as the US does. So we don't share as much of a strategic vision as we ought to as blood allies, as Dr. Kim says. So I think some of the things that the Moon administration has been saying and doing over the last several months suggests to the U.S. that they are more willing to make concessions to both North Korea and to China than the U.S. thinks is prudent or wise in terms of the collective security of South Korea, Japan, and the United States. And of course, there are always the problems between Japan and South Korea, the legacy of World War II, which we don't seem to be able to get rid of in order to facilitate total cooperation among the three allies. I think I once said that the South Korean and Japan attitudes sometimes seem to be the ally of my ally is my enemy. That is not a healthy dynamic or a healthy situation. So I hope that we will not see more of that.
Right, so more cooperation needed in this region, and of course US engagement needs to remain steady in the region. Well, I'm afraid this is where we're going to have to wrap up the discussion. That was Kim Young-jun, Professor of National Security Affairs at Korea National Defense University, and Joseph Bosco, former China Country Director in the US Office of the Secretary of Defense. Thank you both so much for joining the program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.